people wanted to be nonprofit staff. And not just coincidentally, the baby boomers were just entering the workforce. So this is kind of the second stream, the money coming into nonprofits for the first time, and then baby boom generations entering the workforce. So there was a great opportunity for baby boomers to go into this, as well as individually how people felt that might be something of interest to them. And then the third thing I want to say is that we also saw during this period of the 60s and 70s a new generation of nonprofit startup. And many of the organizations that you know today, you'll probably realize, gosh, why is everybody having their 20th and 30th anniversaries now, whereas 15 years ago hardly anybody did that. So things have really, we saw a new generation of nonprofits arise during this period. And a lot of it was following the trail broken by African Americans. Just behind them were women, people with disabilities, all kinds of people who began to assert their places in society, and they found their voices and the vehicles for their actions in nonprofit organizations. So, for example, child care centers, which is, just like, permanent press clothes today, something we kind of take for granted. Child care centers were not there in those days, and they were started by women who cared about the ability of women with children, particularly single women, to be able to hold jobs. Disability rights is another thing. Wheelchair ramps and curb cuts are things that we take for granted today. And yet, those came out of the movements and the efforts of people with disabilities to be able to have access to the kinds of things that those of us who can walk already have and take for granted. So in a very broad way, people who were founding and leading and working in this new generation of organizations came out of causes and out of a belief that they wanted to change the world rather than, for example, out of management schools. Of course, it's questionable that people out of my husband has an MBA, so I can make fun of him. People out of business schools are never really the leading harbingers of social change. Anyway. When he was in business school, everybody was taking these classes on entrepreneurism, and taking risks and everything. And of course, all the people that are really entrepreneurs and starting businesses, they're not going to business school anyway. Sorry, that's an aside. It's not in the state anymore, so all right. So these three streams are very important for us to think about: the influx of federal money into the nonprofit sector, creating employment there, the baby boom generation entering the workforce, and the new generation of nonprofits that arose during this period of time. Okay? Now, one of the implications of all of these things is that we had a lot of people running organizations who had yet to discover management. Like personnel policies, what's that? And many of us, I count myself in the baby boom, really didn't think of ourselves as nonprofit employees. We thought of ourselves as, for example, a child care worker, or a person who was working to build affordable housing. We didn't really even know the term nonprofit professional, for example. And at the same time, American business was also discovering management. So during the same time, we saw the first growth of the big management consulting firms like Bain & Company, McKinsey, and a Boston Consulting Group and others. So what a lot of this led to is nonprofits beginning to professionalize and making professionalization almost something of a cause. So the two big stories of the nonprofit sector during this period of time were basically growth and professionalization. And professionalization of the sector has been important for a number of reasons. So first, organizations have become much more complicated to manage. We are in a much more complicated environment, obviously technologically, but in many other ways. And so as nonprofit managers, we needed to have more skills and to be more sophisticated than maybe we had to be in times past. And secondly, pointing to our professionalization was also part of how we wanted to demand respect from the rest of society. I was talking to somebody in a different state who has Teresa's job here of managing a very large statewide education program for nonprofits, and having somebody once ask her, do you actually get paid for that? So professionalization has been a part of the way in which we've expected to have respect. And you probably know that 62% of nonprofit executive directors have master's degrees or higher. So But professionalization, like everything, always has kind of a downside or some negative impacts that have gone along with its good impacts. And one of these is an assumption that we have, and it's so deeply held that we almost don't even realize we have it, and that is the idea that good management leads to high impact. And that's just not true. So we all know very badly managed organizations that are nonetheless managing to have an impact on the world, right? And you keep saying, oh, those people, we always think they're going out of business, but somehow they manage not to. Everybody says they're crazy, but they are somehow managing to have an impact on the world. And then we also know organizations that could check off every box on any management audit, saying, you know, they're doing everything right, and they're having absolutely no impact on the world. So how is that possible? If we really believe that management was the reason why you were able to have an impact, those two things wouldn't exist. So actually, the thing that we've forgotten in our race to professionalize is the idea that professionalization, management, and impact have to be addressed separately along separate tracks. And let me give you just one example. There's a well-known homeless youth services organization in San Francisco that's gotten a lot of attention for kind of innovation and doing some interesting things. And they work with one of the very big nonprofit consulting firms from back east. And they were actually written up in a number of cases as being this sort of model managed, brilliantly managed organization. And they got a lot of national attention for it, and the executive director subsequently left and went to work for a foundation. And the new executive director came into this homeless youth organization, and what she said at her first board meeting, she said, I'm trying to figure out why kids hate us. So the fact is that simultaneously with this organization getting national recognition for its management ability, they were losing their credibility on the street. The impact of their services were slipping, and nobody saw it because we have an assumption that management leads to impact, and we also have an assumption that our programs are good. It's very easy, it's socially acceptable to say things like we have really great programs, but gosh, our accounting is a mess. But it's not socially acceptable to say, we have fantastic management systems, but our programs are kind of crummy. It's not acceptable, and so we never take the time. So I want you to remember this story about this homeless youth organization in San Francisco, and think to yourself, we don't want to over-focus on management because it doesn't automatically lead to high impact, and that questioning our programs and scrutinizing our programs has to be done just as rigorously or even more rigorously than the work that we do improving our management systems. And I will also say that, and I say this having left, Compass Point, which is a nonprofit consulting firm, that we have also created in our sector kind of a philanthropic consultant industrial complex, and this industrial complex of consultants has a lot of reason, of course, to say to people that they need to have management consulting. So this idea of kind of working on the downsides of professionalization is one of the first challenges that I think the new upcoming generation of leaders and of nonprofits need to address. So, one of the things that's interesting that I've learned a lot about nature while I'm here, but one of the things I've also learned about is rivers. And once you think that if a river just could go whichever way it wanted, it would just go straight. If there were no mountains in the way, it would just go straight. Well, isn't it interesting that a river actually, even though there's a plain in front of it, will actually make turns? And I still have no idea why that's true, but I recognize it's true. And so kind of the nonprofit sector river is also at something of a turning point right now. So I'd like to say